It's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Frans Hinskens, Distinguished Research Fellow at Meertens Instituut and Professor of Language Variation and Change at the Vrije Universiteit, Amsterdam, who kindly accepted our invitation to give the opening lecture of the ICLaVE 9. Formerly, he taught and did research in Nijmegen and Leipzig, and several other universities and research centers in Europe and the United States. My intention is far from trying to make a summary of Frans Hinskens' extensive and intensive CV, so don't panic. Instead, I will intend to carry out an interpretation of his rich and varied contribution to linguistics, social linguistics, and variation theory. First, dialectology and social dialectology. His PhD dissertation on dialect leveling in Limburg, structural and social linguistic aspects, 1992, was the root of a relevant contribution to contemporary social dialectology in Europe. Intensively working with Peter Auer, he contributed to changing the foundations of the social dialectology forever. The SNF Network on Convergence and Divergence of Dialects from 1995 to 1998 boosted and altered the previous panorama on the basis of Peter Trudgill's work on dialects in contact. Today, it is impossible to understand anything of what's up in European dialectology and social linguistics without attentively reading his 2005 Cambridge University Press book in collaboration with Peter Auer and Paul Caswell on dialect change, convergence and divergence in European languages. Second, theory. Dialectological and social linguistic research are not the result of mere collection of atomistic and superficial data, but a substantial part of linguistics. Formal phonology theory and real data from society have to be connected, as White and Schlieven-Lange in 1988 had proposed in a seminal article. Most of Frans Hinskens' efforts have been led in this direction. I would like to emphasize the relevance of each chapter with Roland van Hout and Leo Wetzels, entitled Balancing Data on Theory in the Study of Phonological Variation and Change, in their book on Variation, Change and Phonological Theory in 1997. This is a task of contrasting contemporary and past theories on language change, which is the gist of his lecture today. Third, coherence. The current evolution of both language variation and change theory and social linguistics requires time for reflection. Proposals by the third wave enthusiasts need to be seriously analyzed and carefully contrasted with their theoretical and empirical foundations. A retrospective critical revision of the entire trajectory of our disciplines has to be done. One of the first steps in this direction is Frans Hinskens and Gregory Guy's contribution, 2016, coherence, covariation, and bricolage. Fourth, research on the homeland language. Frans Hinskens' concern for his country and his mother tongue is unmistakably related to his commitment to cooperation and innovation. I will mention just a couple of relevant contributions. The first one is the project with Van Hout and Moiskens on the roots of ethnolets, a really rich and innovative research on ethnolectoral variation in Amsterdam and Nijmegen. The second one, finally, is an international project on the use of Dutch in Netherlands and Belgium. Finally, we should not forget that Frans Hinskens was at the origin of the ICLaVE conference, organized the third edition in Amsterdam, 2005, and is co-founder and co-editor with Auer and Cashrill of the Benjamin's book series, Studies in Language Variation. In sum, if I had to synthesize Frans Hinskens' CV in a few words, keywords, I would say innovation, cooperation, and multiplicity of activities. And of course, generosity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Your Eminencies, Rector and Dean, the Deans, also Director of the PhD program. Is it off? Oh, do it again. So I was trying to say a few nice words about the Eminencies who talked to us today, the Rector, the Deans, also the Director of the PhD program at the University of Málaga, Professor Rosario Arias, for the kind and truly animating opening words. Thank you, local organizers of the 9th edition of this conference. You have worked hard, I know, and to tell from the program you put together, you did a great job. Thanks for the invitation to give a plenary talk. Muchas gracias, caro Juan, for the many nice things you said about me. It's a special honor for me and a pleasure to have the opportunity to present some of my work at this conference. Málaga and the Malaga linguists are very dear to me. Málaga University has played a very important role in the history of the ICLaVE conference, as you already memorized before, because it was here that the conference was founded almost 19 years ago. That happened in the wake of the last activity of our European Science Foundation funded network on social dialectology, a summer school which took place in the fall of 1998. And Juan Villena and his team had organized this summer school. And I'm sure that I'm not the only one here today who has good memories of that event. As you've seen, I'll be talking about sound change, and I'll try to sell you an integrated theory that I'm working on. It's a work in progress, but it might appeal to some of you. The study of sound change is center stage in a range of subdisciplines of linguistics today, and the range keeps broadening. Two aspects of sound change that are typically central are either the process, the origin, the implementation, the spread, and also the result or the outcome. There are at least three different but related questions that are often asked. The what, the how, and the why. What, are we talking about specific sound or a natural class, as in the famous second or high German abstruent shifts? How does it come about internally through innere Kausalität, inner causality, as Meertens has labeled it, or through contact? Why? Is it because of structural forces, co-articulation, prestige? Combining these two dimensions, we get this provisory and, of course, superficial typology. To my horror, in the box on the left, on the right, on the Y process, phonetics is lacking. It was there initially, but something went wrong. Phonetics should be there, of course, and if we zoom on what phonetics can contribute to answer the why question for the process, we can look in the direction of the speaker and the direction of the listener. For the speaker, I could think of articulatory gestures, say along the lines of the work of Brahman and Goldstein. As for the listener, I refer to the work of Ohala on the role of perception and misperception. Historical linguistics zooms in on the time axis, and so do dialectology and social linguistics, although in different ways, through different windows. Phonetics zooms in on the hardware, you could say, and phonology on the software. Phonetics paying attention to speech as a continuous phenomenon, and phonology trying to cut it into binary pieces. There's a lot of scholarship to be mentioned, and it starts earlier even than the neo-grammarians, who I'm very briefly citing now, especially for this famous quote that I'm sure everybody knows. This is an English translation from the Osthoff and Broekman Neo-Grammarian Manifesto from 1878. I highlight exceptionless laws. I highlight applying to everybody belonging to a speech community and applying to all words without exception. You know this is the regularity claim or the exceptionless claim. And in the neo-grammarian model itself, it was already recognized that the effects of the sound laws can be obscured by at least 3 different other types of effects: competing sound change, analogy, and borrowing. I'll be very brief, give you a little simple example of each of these mechanisms. As to competing sound change, in medieval and early modern Dutch, there has been a 2-step change in the original high backgrounded vowel U, which has been palatalized into U, and then later on this U vowel became diphthongized to become a rounded front diphthong. That's one of the things that non-native speakers of Dutch have a difficult time with. This particular process, which I'm going to come back on several times, has regular exceptions and also other types of exceptions. The regular ones, among the regular ones, is the fact that diphthongization from U to ui did not take place before R because of the centralizing effect of R on preceding tense vowels. So we still have items such as sur, mur, dur, who belong to the original set, and they have not been diphthongized for the simple reason that centralization bleeds diphthongization. An example of analogy, which functions to restore regularity after a sound change has taken place. This is an example that most of you will be familiar with as well. Pre-Latin intervocalic as has been voiced, and then in the next step been changed into a specific type of r, liquid, specifically in singular genitive formations as in onosis, onosis, onoris, etc. And this all applied exceptionlessly and phonetically gradient. So it was a true exceptionless sound change. Later, this same thing was applied also to the stems itself. Finally, to produce forms such as honor out of onos, but not floss, flor out of floss. That has taken place later on in several Romance languages, but not in Latin. So this part is not exceptionless. Borrowing, similar example, again, rhotacism. didn't take place in items such as rosa basis, for the simple reason that these items were borrowed from Greek after the sound change had ceased to be productive. That is when the speakers had decided to no longer apply the sound change to new words. So what is the story about exceptionlessness? It looks more like fuzziness in some cases. In 1966, Karl Popper published an essay titled Of Clocks and Clouds, where he contrasts neat, orderly, and predictable phenomena with messy, chaotic, and unpredictable or seemingly unpredictable phenomena. Many data from dialectology have made plain that sound change may not be as clockwise as the early grammarians, neo-grammarians conceived, but is it really an epistemic mess? As you guess, this is a rhetorical question. I'm going to discuss sound change from 3 different perspectives. For none of those perspectives I'm going to tell you anything new, let alone cutting edge. The only thing that I think is new is the fact that I bring these perspectives together. I will show you how I think they interlock into an integrated model of the diachronic development of sound change, both internally and also in the speech community. Not that I think I can change the cloud into a clock, but the mutual synchronization of these 3 perspectives may bring us a bit closer to better insights into the complexity of sound change. We're talking about formal theory, we're talking about generative phonology or optimality theoretical phonology. In early linear theory, and then I'm referring to, for instance, Chomsky and Halley's sound patterns of English from 1968, almost 50 years ago, the locus of variation, insofar as variation was an issue at all, was laid in the rule machinery, specifically rule ordering. So if you have 2 rules which are differently ordered, then you have either 2 different dialects or inherent variation. Another issue which is still around and which keeps exciting phonologists is opacity. Opacity comes in 2 types. The first one is residue, a form which fits the structural description of a given rule, yet does not undergo or has not undergone the rule. The second type concerns forms which do not fit the structural description of a given rule, but yet does undergo, or do undergo, have undergone the rule. Opacity number 1 is clearly related to the concept of exceptionlessness. The ones of you who are familiar with the theory of lexical phonology, and maybe also some of the ones among you who are not, know that phonology in formal theory is conceived of as an autonomous module of the grammar. In this view, phonology is itself, in turn, organized modularly with interfaces with the lexicon, morphology, and syntax. So in terms of lexicon, we see, we talk about things such as the segment inventory, morpheme structure constraints. Talking about morphology, we're talking about cyclic and post-cyclic rules, and for syntax, we can refer to post-lexical processes and phonetic implementation. An exciting type of insight that has developed in lexical phonology and related stratal optimality theory is what is often referred to as the life cycle of sound change. Important names are Paul Kiparsky, Ricardo Bermudez Otero, and Michael Ramsamy. But those are just some of the names. This is how it works, roughly speaking, and I'll give you some examples later on. Initially, there is phonetic variation, more or less random. It can become systematic phonetic variation, and from that point on, it will be exceptionless for a while. It can change into post-lexical processes, and the main distinguishing feature setting apart post-lexical from phonetic processes is the fact that post-lexical processes tend to be defined by specific prosodic domains. So you're talking about, say, syllable onset, or the end of the prosodic word, or maybe the boundary between two intonational phrases. These can then narrow down to become lexical rules, and those are things that interact with morphology. So rules which apply to morphologically derived words. Think of the original version of umlaut and certain stress-related phenomena. The more or less final step will then be for these phenomena to be lexicalized, either in free morphemes or in bound morphemes or affixes. Say, again, umlaut with or without concatenation, but then umlaut is no longer predictable. So you have certain, talking about German, plural forms of nouns which are, and others which are not susceptible to umlaut. Going from systematic phonetic variation to lexicalization, structural predictability decreases. This picture is from a paper by Michael Ramsamy, 2015. Start looking at the top right part. Epiphenomenal gradient phonetic effects can phonologize to become gradient phonetic processes, and these are, again, what I refer to as systematic phonetic variation. They come under cognitive control because they are starting to become directional. They can stabilize to become post-lexical things, and they eventually can become categorical. Think of allophony. They narrow down to, in the technical lingo, this process is called domain narrowing, to become word-level things, that is minor rules or lexical rules, to become things that work on stems. Think of the honor, onis, onos, honor type of change that I showed you before. Eventually they can lexicalize or morphologize to become lexically stored, including redundancy rules or morpheme structure constraints. Now, at the beginning, relatively early in its cycle, in the course of the phonologicalization and stabilization processes, a phonological rule can be generalized, typically through the extension of the context. And there is a little example here from German non-standard, certain varieties of German fricativized voiced velar plosive g into iota. This process is said to have originated before palatal vowels, as in gießen, geben, which come out as gießen, geben. This is obviously a co-articulation thing, assimilation process. Later, this process was then generalized to contexts before non-palatal vowels, such as in gabel, gold, jabel, jolt, and later even to environments before liquid, so items such as graben, to dig, glauben, to believe, graben, glauben. So this is how rule extension can work. At the end of the cycle, and let me go back to the cycle briefly. So that's where you look at lexicalization and lexically stored information. The end of that cycle, the rule can either become extinct, rest in peace, or lexically, or it can spread lexically diffuse. Let's first look at the first scenario, rule death, rule loss. It can trigger analogy. You remember the example that I briefly showed about pre-Latin rhoticism. Another example is from the history of Dutch. In the history of Dutch, in early modern Dutch, there was a process which is often referred to as open syllable lengthening. And it occurred, for instance, in noun-pluralization. So what it often looks like, not necessarily, but in many cases, you add a schwa to the stem, and then the stem final consonant will typically get resyllabified, will be the onset of the next syllable. Schot, will then become schotten, and this vowel O is then lengthened to become O. Similarly, bad, bade, and to the surprise of those among you who speak Dutch, in this period there was also a plural form, bisschopen, for bishops, which is no longer around, because this form has been analogically restructured after the model of those many items which had never undergone vowel lengthening in this position. So this is what can happen after a rule stops to be productive. Another scenario is, as I said, this same process can come to life again, but in a zombie state, in a way, and generalize, lexically diffuse. And an example of this, again, refers to the processes that I mentioned before, namely the palatalization and subsequent diphthongization of original long West Germanic rounded high back vowel, U. There are exceptions in for both parts of both steps in the change. For instance, we have unshifted U in items such as smoel, which is a bit of a vulgar word. Boer has been claimed to never have been shifted. And then a recent loan such as blues for the music genre has never been palatalized, let alone diphthongized. So nobody would speak of blues referring to this type of music. The rule is long dead. It has spread lexically. That is the second part of it, the diphthongization part, has also left residue behind. We have beduusd, gruzelementen, and ruzie, all of which have vowels which are the product of palatalization of an older long U. And this too, and there are many more examples of this type, shows you how it has been spreading word by word, so to say. So what happened is a rule that is no longer productive can either trigger analogy, or it can have an afterlife as a zombie rule, as a lexically diffuse rule. There is a third option, namely the mechanism can start anew. Sometimes an old lexicalized sound change becomes productive again. In the history of Dutch, there has been a process which is often referred to as vocalization of L, the liquid L, after low back vowels. So that's why Dutch has diphthongs in items such as out, wout, where German has retained the liquid. In modern Dutch, this process has become productive again. It has come back to life, but exceptionlessly, following front vowels too. So we have now items such as Niels, which is a name, meel, school, which are often realized also with a vocalized liquid. And that would then create near homophones with existing items such as nieuws, meeuw, schouw, nieuws, seagull, and chimney. So what happened is that this post-vocalic L vocalization, which took place also in medieval Dutch, was there and is back again. As in the subtitle of Tolkien's famous The Hobbit, there and back again. So the life cycle of sound change is a continuum, but one in which the two extremes, Neo-Grammarian sound change targeting phonemes, on the one hand, lexically diffuse sound change targeting items, on the other, sometimes meet, hence a cycle. The whole thing is unidirectional. It always goes from sound structure via grammar to lexicon. The idea is comparable to Richard Jonas and Brian Joseph's Big Bang Theory, quote, saying that sound changes start as phonetically determined events in very small environments, the Big Bang, and in the aftermath of a phonetic event, there can be generalization along various lines, phonetic, phonology, morphology, social space, and the lexicon. This life cycle of sound change is a common yet complex process involving physical, cognitive, as well as social mechanisms. It's humanities in the full sense, just like the Dean was talking about before. Because of its complexity, it proceeds slowly, and typically it results in differences between related dialects and languages. Especially related dialects tend to go through the same sound changes, but they don't necessarily do so at the same rate, producing what is often referred to as microvariation. The speaker's awareness and consequently what I've coined manipulability of a given phenomenon grows from phonetic implementation all the way to lexicalized sound change. Lexicalized sound change is sometimes targeted by correction, hypercorrection. That is the second type of opacity that I showed you before. A form which does not fit the structural description of a given rule does undergo the rule nevertheless, or has undergone. An example here may be correction of this type, maybe the split or the demerging of ceseo or ceteo in Andalus Spanish in favor of Castilian distinción. Another example in Afrikaans, which, as you may know, is a daughter language of Dutch, among other things. Word final T deletion has been lexicalized. A singular form for the noun light is licht, but only if you attach the plural schwa, the T will show up again. So licht, lichte, hoofde. Unlike Dutch, where the T is realized also in the final position in the singular forms. Interestingly, we find alternation between two types of the plural in the case of an item such as kors, which in Dutch has a final RST cluster. The T is no longer around in the singular form in Afrikaans, but it does show up in one of the two variants of the plural form korste, and there is also a plural form korse, showing you that the T is no longer necessarily present in the lexical form. The most exciting aspect of this is the fact that some nouns which do not have an etymological final plosive show the alternation too. So, for instance, an item such as bos, meaning wood, which in Dutch is bosse as plural, has etymologically hypercorrect plural form boste, along with the regular plural form bosse, and an item such as graf or grieve has a very unpredictable, at least from the point of view of Dutch, interesting plural form grafte. The speakers of Afrikaans were aware of the fact that they were doing something illegal from the point of view of the Dutch language. Why did they do so? Well, until about 1925, Afrikaans was not recognized as a legitimate language in South Africa. Up till then, Standard Dutch was the norm. So they were looking at the norm and saw, we're dropping these T's and we shouldn't. So we should put them back, even where they didn't belong. Social linguistics has a lot to say about the rise, the embedding, and evaluation of sound change. One of the main contributions has been LaBeouf's 13 stages model in his famous social linguistic patterns, in which language structure and the speech community are intertwined in the spread of sound change. The variant of the theory in the second volume of Principles of Linguistic Change is slightly different because more attention is paid to acquisition and perception. Three main parts of this particular scenario that LaBeouf suggested are what we know as indicators, markers, or stereotypes. This is a specific status that a phenomenon may have. The difference one of the main aspects of markers and stereotypes setting them apart from indicators is the fact that they show socio-stylistic variation, and stereotypes are even stigmatized. Because of their socio-stylistic meaningfulness, they are what Silverstein has labeled unregistered. They are what Johnstone has described as available for social work. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that apart from social meaningfulness, socially meaningful style can also be a mechanical side effect of speech rate. Think of the work by Dressler and some other people on what Dressler has labeled Allegro rules or Presto rules, connected speech phenomena and other late phonological and phonetic processes such as reduction and assimilation, which are style specific. Going from indicators to markers to stereotypes, social meaning becomes more and more explicit. Social meaningfulness or indexicality presupposes awareness. There we have it again. Socially stigmatized phenomena, those are the phenomena that typically come up from below the level of conscious awareness, can become prone to correction and hypercorrection. And there we have that again, too. Speech communities can be cut up not just analytically, but by the speakers themselves in terms of dimensions such as social class, mobility, age, gender, ethnicity, etc., but also in smaller scale entities such as social networks, communities of practice, etc. Sound change is usually transmitted in dense, multiplex social networks where social cohesion is relatively big and attitudes, norms, and behavioral patterns tend to be relatively uniform. Two important mechanisms there. On the one hand, incrementation, which is roughly every next generation slightly exaggerates the previous generation's patterns of the usage of some innovative variant. Quantitatively, in terms of the relative proportion of usage of the new variant, but also qualitatively, maybe in terms of rule generalization. Another important mechanism, speaker agentivity, and one of the classic cases is, of course, what happened in Martha's Vineyard to the diphthongs. Speakers don't just react, they sometimes initiate. An example here from the work by Heideken et al., 2013 in Language Variation and Change, on the rate at which the vowels of face goat, diphthongize and, or let me rephrase this, the rate at which the diphthongization of the face goat diphthongization and the fronting of goat goose vowels spread in York, UK. Now, as to the diphthongization, these figures are, of course, from the paper. The stronger, you can tell from these figures, the stronger the allegiance to the community, and allegiance to the community is now measured in terms of attitudinal index scores. The higher the score, the more the allegiance to the community. The stronger the allegiance, the more conservative monophthongal variants are being used. So, and this is one of the important messages here, the socio-emblematic meaning or indexicality can slow down the tempo of a social embedding of a sound change or speed it up. How does sociolinguistics deal with exceptionless and diffuseness? One of the main contributions here is also by LaBeouf in his 2007 language paper on transmission and diffusion. These are two different mechanisms of the spread of innovation, specifically sound change. Transmission is typically internally motivated change, and it is typically being spread through the speech community and through the language system, through the process of child first language acquisition. Diffusion, on the other hand, is brought about through language contact, borrowing, if you like. It's a matter of adult second language acquisition. Transmission tends to lead to sound changes being regular or becoming regular. They typically target change from below. They often go about in wave-type patterns, multidimensional waves in the sense of Johannes Schmidt, Wellentheorie, 1875. Diffusion, on the other hand, tends to be also lexically diffuse, typically targets change from above, and is unpredictable, at least structurally speaking, and also lexically. Structural constraints tend to be lost. A little addendum that I made to Labaugh's model here is the extension of transmission mechanism to the geographical picture, where I bring in an insight from work by Odin Robinson and Frans van Kootsum from 1973 and later. Namely, what you typically find is in the area of origin, a rule has reached the most general state. So this is an example from work by Dutch dialectologist Jan Goossens, almost 50 years old as well. I mean, this work is this old. Jan Goossens himself is a bit older. It's about the palatalization of unsaid S in Limburg dialects, generally speaking. So if you look at the map and you try to find the area in numbered 1, then you look at the area where you find palatal S only in foreign words, names, etc., such as Charles, machine, etc. So they wouldn't otherwise palatalize. In the area, the two little areas number 2, you find palatalization also before vowels. In the area 3, which is slightly more to the east, they do that before in foreign words before vowels and also before liquid R, and so forth. It stacks up, it accumulates to the east. So to tell from the picture, and this is also Goossens' interpretation, the sound change probably originated in the area 6 in the east. If the Robinson-van Kootsum scenario applies, then this may have been a case of rule generalization as a result of incrementation. It looks as if every next wave has been a bit less powerful and has expanded less. This is a picture that I put upside down of a cloud formation, which looks pretty much like a mount, the type of picture that we saw before. An example of diffusion is also available in historical dialectology of Dutch. Now we're talking again about the processes that I showed you examples of before, namely the palatalization of long, high back vowel U into U, and then subsequently diphthongization of U into U. The dialectologist Kloeke has done important work on this particular phenomenon in the days before the computer, and he has been said to have done his field work on the bike. So this guy must have been very fit. Kloeke's map that I show you here in the version in Bloomfield's language clearly shows you how a given sound change can have a geographical center from where it expands, which is in this case the northwest, the Amsterdam, The Hague, Rotterdam area, and also how a sound change can affect different relevant items at different points in time rather than simultaneously. So we have lexical exceptions, and the main exceptions here, we're talking only of 2 specific items, namely mouse and house, is that group of dialects where the mouse type items have retained the original long, high back vowel U, and the whose item has undergone the palatalization. So this is clearly a diffusion thing. This transmission diffusion distinction is already in embryo in Schuchert's writings, where he draws a distinction between endogenous and transplanted sound change. Diffusion applies word by word. With respect to the number of affected items, the spread of borrowed innovation often tapers off geographically. There may be a third type. German dialectologists such as Penzel, Zeitelmann, also Henning Andersen and Hermann Scheuringer have suggested that there is a third possibility. I'm not quoting Scheuringer. There's a third possibility for sound change which has properties of both real sound change, that is Neo-Grammarian, regular exceptionless sound change, and sound substitution, which is lexically diffuse sound change. So this type is, on the one hand, prestige-driven as Lautersatz, as lexically diffuse sound change, and at the same time boosted by its phonological naturalness. And I have here an example from some of my own work, which I will, however, skip for reasons of time. Maybe we can come back to it in the question and discussion period. Let me go to the third and last perspective that I will briefly talk about, cognitivist approaches. Now, cognitivist approaches, as far as phonology, phonetics are concerned, are, for instance, Bybie's usage-based phonology and also exemplar theory. There are quite a few names attached to, especially exemplar theory. I mention only Keith Johnson and Pierre Humbert because they were among the pioneers of this approach. In this paradigm, grammar emerges bottom-up and structure is not given a priori or by design. This is a very significant quote because it means we do not assume a language acquisition device or a mental blueprint for grammar or a language bioprogram, as Bickerton referred to it. The cognitive and psychological processes and principles that govern language are not specific to language, but they are in general the same as those that govern other aspects of human cognitive social behavior. They are, in other words, domain general. Little, if any, computation in this approach. In principle, everything is stored redundantly. Every realization of every item is stored in bundles of maximally concrete articulatory, acoustic, grammatical, semantic, and pragmatic information concerning the single occurrences, which are referred to as tokens or exemplars. Everything is stacked in the anecdotal memory in exemplar clouds around the prototype. Lexicon is a cosmos of multi-dimensional networks, and two main concepts in the theory are token frequency, that is the frequency of usage, on the one hand, and type frequency or distributional frequency on the other. And by the way, the information theoretic tools of probability and information theory is an approach that is now very strongly on the rise, especially for phonetic studies. Information theoretic tools of probability, entropy, and surprisal value, as they're called, are also based on token frequencies. They are typically corpus counts. It has been claimed that the more frequently a word is used, that is, the higher its token frequency, the more predictable it is, and the more predictable it is, the more easily it can be reduced. So now we're talking about phonetics, systematic phonetic variation. There is also an opposite effect, at least a mathematically opposite effect, and I quote Bybie, analogical leveling affects low-frequency words before high-frequency words, and sometimes doesn't even affect high-frequency words at all. This is morphophonology. This is what has also been referred to as the conservatory effect or conserving effect. Type frequency refers to what is often referred to as neighbors, words which have a similar phonological shape, words that are one sound away from a given word. Phonologists might refer to this as minimal pairs. From the point of view of this particular approach, sound change is always both gradient and lexically diffuse. In other words, it's always both somehow neo-grammarian and somehow lexically diffuse. Say, 1. There is no such concept as segment. A rule or process can be partly lexicalized or morphologized, and therefore lexically stored, while it's still productive. And this reminds of Ricardo Bermúdez Otero's concept of rule scattering. A rule can be post-lexical and that is productive and already be stored lexically. So one of the questions, one of the main, probably key questions from the point of view of this theory is token frequency merely relevant to reductive change, that is to deletion, assimilation, and the like, or to any type of sound change, including fortition and similar? The latter position was held by Janet Pierre-Humbert. I don't have an answer to that question, but there is some data again for the phenomena that I addressed before, namely the palatalization and subsequent diphthongization of West Germanic long U, which may be relevant. The outcomes of a small study that I carried out on data for 18 relevant items in 353 Dutch dialects studied by Van Reenen for stability versus change of West Germanic U in connection with token frequency per item. The numbers, of course, are in the two rightmost columns, and as you can tell from the Pearson R, there doesn't seem to be a significant relationship between the two. Sound change is obviously too complex a phenomenon to be considered as the domain of one single branch of linguistics. So we need an integrated theory. This will be the last bit of my lecture. But before I go into that, let me first tell you a story about interdisciplinarity and searching for explanations. 3 academics are waiting at a bus stop. One of them is a biologist, the second one a physicist, and the third one a mathematician. On the other side of the street there is a house. Somebody enters the house. A few minutes later, 2 people leave the house. The biologist looks at the other 2 and says, "A remarkable instance of rapid biological reproduction." The physicist says, "Sorry, my dear colleague, but this is a textbook example of a measurement error." Whereupon the mathematician says, "One person enters the house, 2 people leave the house. If one more person enters the house, it will be empty again." This is how interdisciplinarity can work. Hopefully in my proposal it will be a bit more productive and synergetic. Why do we need integrated approaches? Well, there are things that neither of the 3 perspectives can account for. Here is Paul Kiparski, who has pointed out that the same feature, indeed the same rule, can be subject to lexical diffusion in one language or dialect and not in another one, depending on whether the feature is lexically distinctive or not. An example of this could be word final T or D deletion, say in Dutch and related Afrikaans. In the Nijmegen urban dialect, and Roland van Hout has been working on this, final T deletion is clearly a post-lexical thing. That's it. In many Limburg dialects, and I happen to be a native speaker of one of those, the same thing can be shown to be both post-lexical and lexical. That is sensitive to the morphological structure. Think of Greg Guy's exponential effects. In Afrikaans, as I showed you before, this same process has been lexicalized. So why does it happen? Why do phenomena change their status at all? The sort of theory that we need, or a model maybe, that we need should account for lexical frequency effects. They very definitely pertain to productive processes of phonetic reduction, that is, lenition and the like. They also work in the course of the lexicalization of a sound change. That is at the very end of the whole thing. I'll show you a little example later on. The theory of the life cycle of sound change that I've briefly summarized before appears to apply only to internally generated sound change. But how about exogenous sound change? Prestige-driven borrowed sound change, or maybe LaBeouf's diffusion, typically enters the grammar in the lexicalization phase. Now, this is part of the theory that I like to suggest here, at least the present state. It roughly looks like this. Each position of a sound change in the root typology, that is phonetic, post-lexical, lexical, lexicalization, each position of the sound change in this root typology corresponds to a specific set of internal cognitive and also social properties. The combination of the properties adds dynamics to the thing, and this is probably the motor in the dynamics. From this theory, hypotheses can be derived, and I'll zoom in on some of them. First of all, we have them lined up here. So let's do like Albert and his friends and look into this a bit more closely. Post-lexical processes can be rudimentarily lexicalized. That would be a good hypothesis to start with. We have evidence for that. Word final T deletion in the Limburg dialect of Ubach over Worms, that I happen to be a native speaker of, has resulted in at least one, maybe two or three items where the final T, in this case in a specific verb, has been lost. So the verb for to koste, also has a lexical form kosse, with all its inflectional forms derived from that. Similarly, although not necessarily too relevant, melde, melle, for to announce, to register. Here too, a final coronal stop has been deleted, and the deletion has been lexicalized. Second hypothesis, usage-related factors only play a role where grammar underdetermines usage. This is not my idea, but Arto Antilas, in a paper, a linguistic inquiry from 2006. Examples that I'd like to add here very briefly. Reductive sound change, the reduction of unstressed vowels in Dutch. So if we compare two items which are very similar phonologically, such as minuut or piloot, we see that minuut, meaning minute, can easily be realized as minuut or even minuut. So with virtually no trace of the vowel. But you cannot do that with piloot. So it's not okay to say piloot, let alone piloot. And this is clearly a case where grammar underdetermines usage, because these two forms, and many others can be added, are maybe not entirely identical, but very similar, segmentally, prosodically, stress-wise. Yet, in one case you can reduce, and the other one you can't. So there is obviously more than just formal structure here. The third hypothesis says that frequency of usage only affects lenition, does not affect fruition-type phenomena. There is work by Aaron Dinkin on the second form and the short vowels and dialects of English spoken in the northeast of the United States, which has very strong evidence that indeed frequency of usage, that is token frequency, doesn't affect fruition-type phenomena. My example that I showed you for token frequency on the one hand, and the number of dialects in which U has been palatalized and diphthongized in dialects of Dutch is evidence for this claim as well, although it might not be that conclusive, since we're talking about historical change. The fifth hypothesis says that phonetic rules, post-lexical processes are typically indicators, while lexically diffuse sound change will typically involve stereotyping, hypercorrection, stigmatization. The example that I refer you back to is the etymologically hypercorrect plurals in Afrikaans. I'm sorry. The sixth one, there is an inverse relation between the productivity of a phenomenon and the degree to which speakers are aware of it. Operationally, this would mean for a process to be subject to style shifting, it needs to be at least post-lexical. Correction and certainly hypercorrection usually target lexicalized or lexicalizing processes. The last hypothesis that I show you, I don't have a clue how to work this out. The closer different sound changes are ruled typologically, the more coherent they are. That is, the more similar they will be in terms of internal social and cognitive organization. So if anybody has an idea how to study this one, please help me. Future work, at least as far as I'm concerned, future work will be read, reread, and interpret available studies against the background of this proposal. And secondly, hopefully also design new empirical studies to systematically test all hypotheses. Thank you.